Hi guys, this is the follow-up part 2 video on changing out the spring and top bearing on a Jaguar X-Type 2001 to 2009. On the last video you saw that I had a lot of problems with the bottom ball joint. I loosened everything off but it just wouldn't come out. But I did figure it out and released it, and I've compiled that into a separate video in itself. So if you want to see a bit more detail about that, check out that video and I'll leave a link in the description. I'll just show you in this video briefly what I did. So this is as far as I got last time. I put a bar in and I could pull the ball joint lower down, the ball joint spindle, but it wouldn't move any further. I tried lifting the hub up so the ball joint would have enough room to move down, but that didn't work. And if we look up closely, we can see the cutout where the spindle bolt goes, which locks the ball joint onto the hub. And if we turn to the side, you can clearly see that it's to the inside. It's at an angle. And what's happened is it's moved down and flopped into the spindle bolt recess in the hub because the strut isn't vertical enough and the wishbone length is fixed. I'll just show you where it gets stuck with the ball joint removed. Here's the hub and you can see the groove where the spindle bolt went. I'll insert the bolt so you can see more clearly. And this is where the ball joint spindle flops into when you move it down because it's held tight towards the body. So a simple remedy for this is to move the wishbone slightly out. On early models, and some models have got a bolt-on ball joint, you could just unloosen that and that would move it out a bit and that would easily come out then. But a lot of these cars have fixed wishbone and ball joints integrated together. So if we take off this panel here, we can get access to the horizontal bushing on the wishbone at the front. But first you want to release the rear bush mounting so it can pivot freely. Just undo this nut underneath. Now we can release the front bush bolt. Take that out and then we can pivot it forward slightly. We don't need much, only about 10 or 15 millimeter. The only precaution with this is you've got to watch out for the drive shaft coming out, but you can soon push that back in. Just something to watch out for. Now the wishbone bush is released at the front. The wishbone can move out slightly, enabling me to push back on the hub strut to make the spindle on the ball joint vertical, and then it'll come out easily. Like so. No point in struggling with this, with a big bar and lever. What's all that about? Now we can take the little protective heat shield off. Take the drive shaft out of the hub end. I'm using a little nifty tool for this. I'll put a link in the description for another detailed video that I've done on this. Put the drive shaft to one side. And now we can take the strut out. But first we need to realise that on this occasion the spring is detached from the top bearing and is resting on top of the turret on the body. So if you release the nuts inside the engine bay, it'll be still under compression and it'll probably release onto your foot or do some other damage. So I need to find a way of compressing the spring first before I'm taking the strut off within the wheel arch, which isn't easy to do. I tried to figure this out with my spring compressors, and in the end I had to weld some nuts on the other end to make them work properly. But I managed to get them on both sides, and here they are in situ. Just need to wind them down now and see if we can get the spring clear of the turret. Yep, the spring's clear of the turret now. So I can go inside the engine bay and release these 3 nuts. While standing at the side of the wing and keeping a hold of the strut. Don't lose the nuts down inside the engine bay. And again, it's preferable to renew these nuts. Lower the strut and take it out from underneath the wheel arch, being careful not to knock it into anything. Once the strut's out, I can take off the top nut with a swan neck ring spanner, 18mm, and you'll need to hold the centre spindle with a 6mm Allen key. Take that off and keep all the parts in line. Take all the parts off. The dust cover and bump stop are okay, so I'll be renewing those. I'll just have a cup of tea. I'll just take it off, so I want to examine what the top of the damper is like. If it's corroded and I need to do something about it. You can of course replace the whole strut if you want, if the dampers aren't working, but these are. Test them by pushing them in and then they should slowly release. They should be quite stiff to push and release slowly. Fettle up all the rust. Treat it. Then paint it. And I did the same under the wheel arch. It's quite bad under there. Once those are done, I can now start to put the spring back onto the strut. First thing to do is measure the distance between the mount on the strut and the bearing when it's in place. And keep that distance in mind when you wind the spring down, so you can check when it's compressed enough. Make sure your spring compressors are even on both sides. And wind down each side evenly as you go. Make sure you do this outside, away from everything and everybody. Wear protective gloves, some protective goggles, and some stout boots and thick jeans. You don't want to be doing it in flip-flops and shorts. And as my Uncle Bob says, always respect the spring. It holds immense power, and I think Bob does know a few things, although his living quarters aren't up to much. Although he has renovated recently, as you can see. The bottom of the spring has got a little sort of plastic sleeve just to protect it from rust and corrosion, I guess. Put that back on. Put the bump stop and dust shield back on. That just sort of pushes on until it hooks over the little hooks on the strut. I had to rotate that to get it seated. Then slide on the spring. Place in the last part of the coil, which has got that rubber sleeve or plastic sleeve, up against the stop. Down here. Put the bearing top on. And put my washer and nut on. And tighten down, keeping the spindle shaft held in place with the Allen key. Something's not right here, it doesn't go down enough. I'll have to take it off again. On closer inspection of the two bearing caps, the old one had the washer and it fit into this recess. which lifted the space so the flange nut would go on the top. So on the new one, there's no inner recess, so it can just fit into the recess on top of the inserted collet. So I'll go and put that on. Tighten that home. I can always retorque these when they're in the car. Right, that's done. Now I've just got to wind out the spring compressors. And again, you've got to do that evenly. And just something to note is while you're winding it down, make sure the seat at the bottom where the coil ends at the stop fits correctly. Mine kept moving around a little bit and the plastic sleeve wanted to come off. But in the end, it all turned out okay. There's just a few marks on the spring where the compressor's threads were up against the spring, taking the paint off a little bit, so I'll just touch those up. Difficult to avoid really. But the spring end is up against the stop nicely with the sleeve in place. So I'm happy with that. Put it back on the car. As you can see, I've sorted the rust out in the turret. Lift up the strut, and ideally it's a good idea to have somebody else put the nuts on while you align the studs on top of the bearing mount. But if you haven't got anybody, you can still do it by yourself. Just insert it, hold it in place, and then reach round with your nuts and put the nuts on. Or there's another method, like I'm showing you here, with a bottle jack underneath the hub, which is really easy once you've aligned it, and then just jack it up slowly into place, and then you can put your nuts on to your heart's content. Easy. Tighten the nuts up. Now you can either torque up the nuts on top of the turrets now, or I can wait till I put all the car back together when it's on the ground and do it then. Doesn't make much difference really. And I'll do the centre nut strut retaining nut now, which is 47 Newton meters. If the shaft rotates, you'll have to use an open-sided socket. As there's a bit of corrosion on the splines in the hub, I'm going to clean that up. Use a flat-bladed screwdriver with a rag wrapped around it and go along the channels. And I've done the same with the drive shaft end. Now I want to reinsert the drive shaft into the hub, making sure you put some spline grease on it first, but don't put any on the threaded end where the nut goes. You might have to rotate the drive shaft a little bit to get it in and waggle it around a bit, and it should just slip in. Once that's in and your drive shaft is seated, move on to the ball joint. Put the heat shield protector on. Push down on the wishbone and align it up to the splined hole on the bottom of the hub. Refit a new ball joint spline bolt and a nylon lock nut. And tighten to the correct torque, which is 83 Newton meters. I'll leave all the torque settings in the description as well, so you can access that later. Now we can push the wishbone back into place and put the horizontal bolt back in. I put some grease on the bolt shaft and some Loctite on the end of the threads. Tighten that down to the correct torque, which on these, both the bush bolts and nuts, are 90 Newton meters initially and then 60 degrees. And as I said, it's the same with the rear nut and bolt. While I was at it, I took it up on myself to have a look at the ABS wheel sensor, as these have a habit of corroding up into the hub and jamming themselves solidly. I've actually had this one out anyway, but I soaked it with penetrating fluid. Take the little T25 stainless steel screw out. That's fairly easy. And then it's a question of waggling it and teasing it up out of the hub with a flat bladed screwdriver, being careful not to break it, of course. As you can see, there's lots of corrosion around the outside at the top. But if you waggle it and pry it and then soak it in penetrating fluid as much as you can, hopefully you can get it out. And eventually, success. So I'm going to clean the sensor up with a rag. And then carefully remove the corrosion on where around the hole, but not to drop anything in the hole. Once I've done that, I'm going to clean inside the hole with a rag a little bit, attached to a screwdriver. And then grease it and put it back. That might just save me a problem later on. Reattach the connector. Just pushes on that one until it clicks. Put the link rod and bracket back. Push in the cable bushes. refit the track rod end. Just give it a tap. Just take this chisel out now and reattach the rear of the subframe. Making note of my alignment marks when I loosened it off earlier. Tighten all those bolts home. Finishing them off with the torque wrench. The large M10 bolt is 70 Newton meters. And the two small ones onto the body are 35 Newton meters. Just make sure they're tight but not over tight. As I said, I'll list all the torque settings in the description. So I've just got the brakes to put back and the disc, which I'll be renewing very shortly. And now is the time you can put your new hub nut on. And tighten that as tight as you can for now. So we'll have to put the wheel on and then drop it down to the ground so we can torque it up properly. I'm just going to put this plastic panel back in. Slot this little rubber cutout behind the brake pipe here. And insert this little clip behind the panel at the front. Line the bolt hole at the bottom and put the screw in. There's just a screw and some plastic push fit connectors. Push the plastic piece of the connector in first, and then there's a little plastic screw that goes in the centre, or a plug that expands it at the rear. They're a bit delicate and easily broken, so you might need to buy some new ones. And with the rear panel you just have to sort of line it up with the holes in the body. That one goes through sort of two panels. Don't not fit them, because they're very useful for protecting vulnerable parts from all the dirt and grime from the road. Put the wheel back on. Tighten the hub nut as tight as you can with somebody pressing on the brakes inside and in gear. Then lower the car to the ground, make sure the handbrake's on. And retorque the hub nut, which is 270 Newton meters, which is quite a lot. Which is too much for my torque wrench seen here, so I'll have to buy a bigger one before moving the car. Anyway, when you're done, replace the centre cap, just push that in until it clicks, and we're done. Hope this helped you out, guys. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.